Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Janos. I'm a professional concept artist. I work in the game and movie industry for about 7 years, and I'm also a full-time art teacher. And today we're going to look at the work of Franciscus, who's one of my students in my mentorship program. And Franciscus and I, we are very close at the end of his portfolio project. And today I want to talk about something which I find very important to create the so-called eye candy. Imagine you're going into a gallery, and in this gallery there are hundreds and hundreds of pieces of work. How do you decide where you stop? How do you decide where you really want to pay attention and where do you want to look? So how can we control that as artists? There are a few things when we make these images where we can really lead and manipulate the eye into the image. One is of course composition. So as an example, what works very well here already in the image of Franciscus is that these lines are creating some sort of visual guidelines for the eye. So wherever the eye is entering the image, it's kind of like leading us to the focal area, the focal point, which is this magical forge here in the middle. The other thing, obviously, is contrast. So contrast is very important because it is the strongest point of getting the attention of the eye, which is dark versus light contrast. Now the interesting part here for this image, how do we make sure that we are providing the best case scenario for the eye to look at the image? Because you see this is pretty advanced, right? If I zoom in here, you see all the guys working on a forge. There's the design of the forge. There's like so much work which already got into the whole thing, and it looks really nice. We have this guy working here. We have these people walking in the back. So we have these really nice story elements, and we want the eye to go there. We want that the eye is looking there. There are certain things which also kind of like make it harder for the eye to go there. So for example, and this is a good point, if you see these little runes and writings, they are part of the story and they are part of the IP Franciscus thought about, which is nice. But the problem is that these kind of like runes here in the back distract a little bit, because we have, of course, a nice color balance, but it is a little bit too much. So Franciscus overdid it a little bit too much. So if we go in here and let me quickly paint out some of these runes in the back, so that we are barely see them anymore. And I'm not looking at the big image, I'm actually looking at the small one here, the small thumbnail on the side. And also a quick tip from my side, I always like to do that. I basically reopen the same window twice and then I scale it down. And whatever I do in here also happens here, but I still have the overview of my image. So we are basically going in and we are just painting out quickly some of these. We can also do that in black and white. So we just put the image to grayscale, go in, and we see where everything is kind of like too light, we just paint this out. Also for the runes in the back, right? It's really cool to have these, and it's really cool to have the color variation, but you have to be careful with this because we don't want to overdo it. We don't want to distract the eye. Also, if you have a very strong color contrast where you have something like green and red or blue and orange, that you can create a lot of distraction. And we don't want to distract the eye unnecessary. We actually want to make sure that the eye goes where it's supposed to go. And you will see after I'm finishing this, so I'm just quickly going over this. Or the interesting part is that the eye technically don't need all these information very far back. It's also often a beginner mistake where people think they need to have the detail they have in the foreground and the midground also in the background. It's not the case because the eye and the brain is very smart, and we can use this smartness, so to speak, to fake the detail in the back, because we need to be able to give also the eye a little bit of rest. In painting and drawing, it's all about communication, and what we want to communicate is, of course, the continuation of detail, but only to a certain degree. Okay, so now let me turn the layer on and off. So you see basically here now that all the noise is kind of like disappearing, right? And if I zoom out further, it enables the eye to give it a little bit more closer view on the focal point. But there's more we can do. So we can also dim a little bit of the stuff in the foreground as well here. But here it's fine. So it's kind of like a okay point. But it's important when you add this type of detail that it's not adding too much contrast. So the other part now is I will create a multiply layer. If you never use the multiply layer, it's basically a layer where you can take a either cooler gray or warmer gray and you go over the surface you want, and it's kind of like only pushes the darkness of it. What we can do now to push this even further, we can go in very gently to add a little bit more contrast here, to push these shadows a little bit more. And it's probably kind of like faking it because this stuff was built in 3D and then he painted over it. So the light and everything was kind of like already there, but it is of course the artistic note and it's the decision of the artist to say, okay, I want this a tiny bit more contrasty, so that I really make sure that the eye is going there. And if it's too delicate in terms of detail, we can also use the gradient tool, or we can use a soft round brush, kind of like just pushing that a little bit more. Now I'm erasing the terms in the middle. And you see through doing this, I'm kind of like pushing the contrast here a bit more. Now I also make the silhouette read stronger. Same thing here. So since it's already very clean work, I don't want to destroy that. So I'm just going in there. And I can also push the gradient of these stone walls a bit more, because there is always a gradient. And a gradient, when I say gradient, I mean that light is basically traveling. So it is never the same on a surface. So now let me check. So now I just darkened the whole thing a little bit more, right? I pushed basically the contrast and made it a bit darker. And then we can also decrease the amount of detail in the back a bit very easily. We just take the local color of the sky, just gently go over this, just a tiny bit. Always great to do that in black and white, so we can push the dark value here a bit more. So we kind of like push it further back. Now we can also make this guy a bit more contrasty here, because he is actually the main focal point and he's right in front of the bright light source. Then we can also push the cast shadow of this guy a bit more. Same here. Also pushing the gradient in general here a bit more. And then last but not least, we go in there, and I like to do that very often. It's kind of like using linear.add mode with the linear.add brush. And what we can do, we can basically paint in light, but also we simultaneously add color to that. So if I, for example, take a red here and I go over this, and you see I'm not only using light, right? I'm also adding color to that. There is where we can kind of like control the contrast of the light, but we can also add a little bit more color variation without painting all these blue things everywhere. Because I felt also that the light of the flames could be a bit glowy. And it's often that when you work on something very long, you kind of like want to finish it, right? So it gets really hard, especially when you do environments and when you do something which is a bit more complex. But if you just take more breaks in between and you kind of like wanted to push yourself a bit more, you see how great the result will be at the end. So we can even push this a bit more here, further back. So now let's check what is happening if I put everything in a folder and I turn it on and off. Do you see the difference? So if I go in black and white now, the contrast is stronger in the middle. It is there. It is where my eye will go. So if I zoom out, my eye is still there. And this is what I want. I want you to practice this. I want you to try that out for your images. This episode was helpful for you. Please let me know in the comments below. If you have any more questions in general about painting, I still have slots in my mentorship program. So make sure to check out my website, janusz-art.zone. There's a link below. That's it from me today. Otherwise, I wish you an awesome day and have fun drawing and painting. See you soon. Ciao, ciao.